The global oil price has been making a comeback over the past week, though after sinking to its lowest point in 12 years. The markets received a boost after key oil-producing nations called for an OPEC meeting to discuss how to stabilize the prices. Venezuela's president has said members of the oil cartel need to start negotiations. He sent his petroleum minister on a tour of major producing nations. And a similar message came from the Secretary General of OPEC, calling for joint action to find a solution. The leading OPEC country, Saudi Arabia, though, so far resisting calls to cut production in order to push the prices back up. But international development consultant Paulo von Schirach thinks the Saudis' interests are political. They are not economic.
What the game plan of Saudi Arabia is and how long will they be able to keep it, it's really a difficult thing to say. This seems to be more of a political play rather than in a calculated, oil price play. Saudi Arabia itself is paying a very, very heavy price as we speak for the low oil prices that it has, in a sense, mandated by keeping production at full throttle of over 10.4 million barrels a day. Saudi Arabia last year ran a deficit of $100 billion. It had to go to capital markets and issue bonds.
Still, the sharp drop in oil prices sent ripples across the global economy. The Russian ruble, for instance, literally fell off a cliff in 2015, losing over 50% of its value against US dollars, leaving now, I suppose, 70,000 Russian mortgage borrowers suddenly unable to keep up with their repayments. Investigating for us, RT's Ilya Petrenko.
There's barely anyone in Russia who's not been affected by the oil-driven plunge in the value of the ruble. And there's one group who simply cannot afford to live. Those who took out mortgages in foreign currencies. Their monthly repayment sums have gone way above their wages. Some have begun besetting banks. Or in one case, even blocked a street, which was bound to catch the eye of the Western media.
The crowds, as you can see, start to gather to protest the economic hardships that the country is facing.
Increasingly, over the past couple of days, they're coming out onto the streets. They're staging protests at banks.
I'm outside the office of the Bank of Moscow, where, according to CNN, crowds of protesters were gathering. Well, indeed, behind me, as you can see, there is a group of about 15 disgruntled borrowers who were, in fact, let inside the bank a little earlier to discuss their problems with the management. And I was told that they've already begun negotiating a special approach and special terms for treating their mortgages. And as you can see, the situation is relatively calm.
But a deal is still a long way off. Sounds much like banksters' behavior anywhere in the world. Profit is their god. But what is their side of the argument?
You're not taking into account the bank's liabilities. Banks have their own debts and accepted deposits in foreign currencies. How are they going to deal with that? People have taken grave risks by borrowing in foreign currencies. If you get paid in rubles, you should never do that.
Although many have ignored such warnings or were bluntly fooled, being ensnared by lower interest rates. But as the pockets are emptying, the problem needs to be solved ASAP.
А какой они предложили первый шаг?
Well, when the media can't play on the scale and violence of the protest, some don't hesitate to put a predictable spin on the story.
The protests that we've seen so far have been very small in scale. But this is Russia, remember, and we don't get many protests here, and so even these small ones will be of concern to the Kremlin.
As in every Russian news story, there's always one villain. Ilya Petrenko, RT, Moscow.